All right, the last section in chapter 25, which will bring our local and state governance unit, at least from the textbook, to a close. Financing state and local government. So we're looking at spending and raising revenues. What are the major federal and state limits on raising revenue for state and local governments? What are the four principles of sound taxation? What are the major tax and non-tax sources of state and local revenue? How can we describe the state budget process? One thing to keep in mind here as we go forward is I will describe and explain the system as it stands in the state of Nebraska, but know that there are proposals to fundamentally reshape the way we tax. However, they aren't looking at fundamentally reshaping the way we spend, simply the way we tax. There's lots of good discussion to be had there among everybody in the community, because ultimately you guys are the ones who have to pay these taxes too in the not so distant future. So here we go. All right, federal limitations on raising revenues. States cannot raise revenue from interstate and foreign commerce. That means that if they're doing business or shipping a product outside of a state, or someone is coming into a state to do business, they cannot tax those transactions. The federal government and its agencies. So, for example, an agency that you guys or your families may interact with frequently is the United States Department of Agriculture, at least to some degree. If they were buying a product or service, they could not be taxed. Any unfairly imposed or administered tax. So the feds say that the state can't pick on one subgroup or one region of people. Taxes that require confiscated property. So the example I believe that I gave in class was that they could not deem it a tax and then require that the payment of this tax is all of your firearms or something like that. They cannot confiscate property. They cannot take your car or your house. They can only take a piece of your income or purchases so that it is a cash payment. Taxes, and the last but not least, taxes imposed for other than public purposes. Any tax imposed must be collected through public means and distributed to public projects. States then impose their own set of limitations on themselves and local entities. Most constitutions create tax-exempt groups. In the state of Nebraska, clergy are tax exempt. So if you are a pastor or a priest or a rabbi of any religious affiliation, you are not taxed, or you are eligible to not be taxed. You note that in, for example, their vehicles. A lot of times you'll see tax exempt on the vehicles that they drive, or sometimes those vehicles are owned by churches. Churches are also tax exempt groups. State codes often set maximum rates for levies. This is one of the great controversies in Nebraska taxation policy. Property tax is how we fund most local government, including schools and counties. However, the state, in an attempt to control taxation, has placed caps on the percentage that the assessed value can be taxed at. And there are some counties that are at the top of that cap. We are fortunate to not be one of those counties, or school districts for that matter, because we have a lot of grass that we get to tax out here. And then some taxes are entirely prohibited, like taxing groceries. Under our current tax system, groceries, unprepared food items. So there's a distinction to be made there, because if you walk into the gas station and you buy a pizza, that's taxed. If you walk into the grocery store and you buy paper towels, that's taxed. But if you go buy a gallon of milk in that same grocery store, that's not taxed. And with the technology that we have today, you can ring up both of those items, the paper towels and the milk, and the computer knows the difference between the two items and knows how to apply the tax correctly. So that is a lot easier to do today than it was even just 20 or 25 years ago, when computers were still a pretty novel thing. All right, so principles of sound taxation. Subjects contribute in proportion to their abilities. So basically, the more money you make, the more able you are to contribute to taxation, which is why we have a uh, graduated tax scale. So as you make more money, the percentage you pay goes higher. Um, while if you are below the poverty line, you don't pay any income tax at all. It's part of the reason why is a tax exempt item, because it's believed that to tax groceries would be unfair to financially disadvantaged families. Taxes must be certain and not arbitrary. That's that graduated scale that taxation is built on. I earn roughly $41,000 a year, and I pay 12% of my income in taxes. It is fixed, and it is fixed before the taxation year begins, rather than waiting for your taxation or your income to be determined and then deciding how much the government's going to take of it. Taxes are levied at a time and in a manner convenient to the contributor. That is a sound principle of taxation, not always a practiced principle of taxation. However, it is fixed and certain that the taxes you owe need to be paid by April 15th of the year following the year you earned it. So I earned my 2022 income, and by April 15th of 2023, my taxes have to either be paid or filed for the return for the overpayment of taxes. Taxes should not take much more money from the people than the government needs. This is another good principle of sound taxation, but we have a bigger problem where we spend more than we tax, which is problematic in a lot of ways. And we've had lots of conversations about those through the executive branch unit. All right, sources of revenue. This is not necessarily the best representation of taxes in Nebraska, because property tax, particularly at the local level, property tax dominates the revenue sources for school districts and counties, while villages and towns and cities can use more sales tax because they have a sales tax base that is greater. It is true that there is a federal government block that is typically paid into school districts and counties and towns and states that is significant, but that also comes with a lot of strings attached. And when I say that, I mean that there are requirements in order for you to get and use and continue to get that money. States have have the option to do individual income and corporate income taxes. Um, those are typically lower than federal percentages, but again, make up a significant piece of the financial system in a state. All right, the budget process at the state level. Each year, agencies prepare estimates of its needs for the upcoming year based on staff salaries and new positions they might need to hire, positions that they have already hired, and anticipated pay raises. Estimates are reviewed by an executive budget agency, and then those are passed on as the governor's budget with all of the supporting information that explains why an agency has asked for certain dollar amounts. That is considered part by part, funds are appropriated, and revenue measures are then passed by the legislature. In the state of Nebraska, we do this process every 2 years. We are currently in a budget cycle of the Nebraska unicameral. So by the middle of June, roughly, hopefully beginning of June, we should have a budget that will serve for the 2024 and 2025 fiscal years. And then in 2025, we'll do this all over again with new senators. So the governor supervises the execution of the budget approved by the legislature, and then the execution of the budget is checked independently by auditors. In the state of Nebraska, we elect an independent auditor. That state auditor and his or her staff, in our current case, his staff, watches the expenditures of the state and state agencies, but they also are able to look at school districts and counties and cities throughout the state to make sure that they are also managing their financial situation adequately. And with that, we end chapter 25. So section 4 review, here we go. The federal government does not allow states to tax interstate commerce, the sale of food, property, or income. You should know that one. And number 2, what is the major source of state and local revenue? Individual income tax, property tax, corporate income tax, sales tax. According to the chart, it is sales tax. But the reality in Nebraska, under our current tax system, is that property tax is the largest burden or source of revenue for most